The City of Stoke-on-Trent Welfare Service for the Handicapped came into active operation in 1955. The geographical situation of this city and the large number registered lends itself to a specialised service working in cooperation with others.
So we've got the Pop Dogs group coming today, haven't we? And they're going to be bringing with them some lovely oral histories, which I'm really pleased about having in the archive, because we've got a couple I know that they've interviewed from the Mount School for the Deaf. So they're going to be really interesting, I think, for future use. What we're going to do first is take them down into the stores, show them around the archive stores, show them where their oral histories will be kept. So all our old documents are this area and that behind.
The question then is the same question as now. How visible is disability?
Nationally, 1 in 6 people live with a hearing loss. In Stoke-on-Trent, it's 1 in 5.
Painted by Minton Pottery.
It's a lot more than we realise, which is why I felt quite naive. 17 years ago when I walked into Deaflinks and was like, how many people?
Recordings, and then we'll have a look at some of the documents Mariel's got out. She'll tell you what they are. And
Deaflinks is quite old. It's over 150 years old.
The North Staffs Deaf and Dumb Society, as they were originally known, go back to 1868.
It was financed to be able to provide weekly meetings for access to religious services for the deaf community.
They had a number of venues, none of which were particularly salubrious. They were often dirty, they were very make-do.
In fact, anywhere that suitable accommodation can be obtained, bearing in mind the particular needs of the handicapped.
And then in 1936, obviously it was still continuing, growing bigger, trying to offer that more support. They got donated a plot of land in Shelton, and they fundraised over £300,000 to be able to make a building purpose-built to meet the needs of the deaf community.
The new centre in Shelton, Wellesley Street by the way, opened in 1936, and by this stage there was a great deal more concern about the layout and how it might advantageously affect the people who are going to be using. And this can be seen also at the workshops for the blind in Fenton, which were opened in a similar period. So this was really, really a big stride forward.
A time when members can get together and enjoy the companionship so many need. Their parents and guardians are able to enjoy a well-earned respite.
Back when the charity first started and they were called Deaf and Dumb Society, the word dumb started to be associated negatively. So we recognised in that there was a need for a name change. So in 2001 we changed the name to Deaflinks.
Transport to clubs and social events on which the disabled depend so much is provided by members of the city's Rotary clubs. These drivers often work under very adverse conditions. Their passengers may be heavy and difficult to handle. Wheelchairs, crutches and walking sticks are liable to damage their vehicles. Nevertheless, they maintain their regular and very valuable service.
One of the main things I like to say whenever I'm talking about, whenever we're trying to raise deaf awareness, is remember, yes, they're all deaf, but they're all still unique individuals that have their own life story, their own upbringing, their own support network.
I was born in Stoke, so I've lived in Stoke all my life. It was difficult for deaf people. Lots of people hadn't heard about deaf people before at that time. When I was about 13, we used to go to the deaf club with friends.
I've been linked to the deaf community here for a long time.
I love mixing with other deaf people, and lots of people here today are from the same school as myself.
If they weren't at school, they had to go to the social club to see their friends and talk to their friends. They couldn't pick up the phone, so they had to go there to have those conversations, make those plans, meet their friends. And that's what Deaflinks was. It was their social hub and their support hub.
I have friends as part of the community, the deaf community. We all come down and get together, we go to the pub.
And the deaf community is quite a small community, so yeah, I feel a lot happier with deaf people.
So they've become quite a close-knit and insular community because they've only ever had each other. They were cut off from the rest of the world. They just went to deaf schools, and a lot of the time they'd go home and even the families couldn't communicate with them.
My parents didn't use sign language too much to me, so yeah, that was quite difficult and quite frustrating.
So I was the only one that was deaf in my family. My mum, she couldn't really sign, and you know, all the children would go off and do their own thing really.
So they preferred to be out and socialising and at the deaf club, or like Charles said, working. They prefer to be out because then they've got somebody to communicate with and talk to.
The Mount School was for blind and deaf children, and it opened a long time ago now, in 1897.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so well over 100 years ago.
If you were profoundly deaf, you were sent to a deaf school. You wasn't sent to a mainstream school.
The Mount building in Penkle has a wonderful history, built as a mansion for Josiah Spode, the master potter, in 1803. But today we're interested in that period, 1897 to 2000, when it was the Mount School for the deaf and dumb, and they also catered for the blind, by the way.
I went to the Mount School and I was about, when I was 4, so from when I was 4.
I used to board. At the end, I used to travel back and forward from home.
At the school, the teachers within the deaf schools didn't teach sign language, they didn't use sign language, they didn't allow the use of sign language. So there was no real communication between the deaf students and the hearing teachers, because the schools were forcing them to try and fit them into the hearing world as they saw it. It's a harsh history, but it's their history, that they went as far as they wouldn't allow the students to, amongst themselves, sign to each other.
This is my favourite bit though, Terry.
Lots of deaf people there didn't have the same language skills as myself.
They didn't spend time with them, teaching them to read and write. They didn't think they were capable.
Too much sport maybe for me. Not much art, not enough art.
They spent more time just getting them to either do sports or trying to force them to speak, trying to force them to lip read, trying to force them to hear sounds.
Yeah, I didn't like writing and English at school. English was really hard. But arithmetic, no, it was all right. Arithmetic was okay. So when I was doing arithmetic and that kind of thing, I was fine with that. That was good. But writing and English, not good. Not very good at all for me.
The teachers weren't very good. The work was too easy for me, really.
Woodwork, we did a lot of woodwork as well. Oh yeah, really liked that. I was always very artistic and creative, and yeah, I really enjoyed that. I wish they had more creative subjects at school, really, yeah.
You know, you've got some people there, they would have only been home once a month, and they would have gone home and nobody in the family talked to them, so they felt isolated and looked forward to going back to school, even though they hated school, but just because they had someone to talk to.
I'd had enough with school by the time it came to finish. I just wanted to get out. I was just better in the outside world. 16, I was ready to work, I was happy to work.
What about this idea of setting them up for life? Well, one way in which this could have been done, and was on rare occasions, scholarships were sometimes granted and funded for people who showed artistic ability. So there's a young fellow by the name of Klaus who in 1907 is displaying wonderful creative ability, and so he gets a scholarship and he's trained at Copeland's in Stoke and then later at Wedgwood in Etruria. So he reaches the age of 18 and a half after all this training, and he's good enough to be set up for a job in the pottery industry. Well, that's not bad going for somebody who is congenitally deaf.
Since this department has been in operation, 85 handicapped people have been placed in regular employment. The initiative shown by this local firm sets an example for other employers. Through her own efforts, she has mastered the appliances and become a valued employee. We see in Murray the personification of all the others who have overcome their particular disability to find a usefulness and purpose in life.
Joseph Ellis, who was very, very involved, an absolute pivot with the North South Deaf and Dumb Society. His job was to secure employment for those people in the Deaf and Dumb Society. What he did, quite literally, was to stand in the old dole queues, the labour exchange queues, would you believe, and try and negotiate with folks to secure jobs for the deaf and dumb. He made several phone calls, he and his wife, very important at this time. There's a statistic somewhere, 1933 I think the date is, where it is stated that there were 280 deaf and dumb people across North Staffordshire, 172 in Stoke itself, and all but 12 had been given jobs. That's a wonderful testament to the ability of Mr. Ellis.
Apart from the handicraft instruction and social contact available at the centre, these meetings have a valuable function in assessing capabilities with a view to placing in employment. Many have never experienced the satisfaction of creative work or the necessity for punctual attendance, but after a reasonable period of instruction, some can be recommended to the Ministry of Labour and local employers.
The Deaf Club up here, they helped me get a job in Stoke at Spode.
So I worked at Johnson Brothers, then I got pregnant, and then I went to work at Spode. I worked at Royal Dalton.
It was pretty much going down the mines or going in the pot banks. That was pretty much the main two areas. And I think it's because that it was seen as the two areas that needed limited communication.
Well, the pottery firms did occasionally have to have their arms twisted up their backs. In other words, you had to put pressure on them to get what you wanted in terms of the jobs provided, the opportunities given.
So I worked at Spode from when I was 16. I went and had a look and I was like, wow, what can I do here? This is amazing. I'd heard about things that were going on, they were explaining to me, and they showed me the pots and that I could paint them. And my job was painting the pots and the ceramics.
So I worked as a lithographer. When I first started, it was obviously quite difficult, but as soon as I got used to it and got experience at it, then I found it quite easy.
So I would make the hobs, the ovens as well. So the oven doors, I would be involved in that, and the trays, we would make those as well.
Initially a painter, and then I was worked lining different pottery items.
Creating the hobs, that was my favourite because they were so intricate.
There was no deaf people there at that particular time. There were other deaf people where I worked, and we all used to communicate together, so there wasn't too much of an issue.
When I came to Spode, there was a gentleman called Ken Picking, who was one of the hand painters at the time, and he was deaf. He was very talented, very good quality.
There weren't any interpreters when I was at work. It was hard. It was hard. I didn't fully understand what was going on all the time.
I used to communicate with pen and paper, and sometimes I could lip read.
Bit by bit, I was learning what to do and learning what was going on, and then I made friends, and we would help each other out.
We didn't sign language, no, but we got used to each other. Eventually, he could understand you, and you could understand him.
Lots of people were deaf and worked at Creda. Yeah, we had a good community there. Maybe about 12 of us, and we'd be signing with each other. We'd have a cup of tea at break time and things like that. And then we'd go to the pub. We'd go to the pub together after work. That was always really nice. There were about 4 deaf people in different departments, different places. And I was the lazy one. I was the lazy one.
In the early days, I think you worked more hours per week.
Time is money, so we had to make sure that we got through everything because they were very on it with time and what they were paying us for. So there's lots to get through as well. People got told off if they were talking too much in the background, but I never had that problem. I just got on with work. I'd go back to my workstation and I'd have a little cup of tea with me, and I'd have taken it with me, and I had a little sip of tea, and my boss couldn't see, and then I'd carry on working. That was my little treat.
labourers, you know, when they were bringing work, the work wasn't of a good standard. You know, they thought they could just pass it off onto me. So I did challenge them sometimes. I didn't want deaf people to be at the bottom rung of the ladder.
And they all just, like, they're taking it on the chin, like you say, oh yeah, well I just had to learn it, you know, I just had to watch and copy, and, you know, there was no one to tell me, no one to support me, I just did it. And I do wonder if it's just a case of, that's all they've ever known. If it's all you've ever known, you don't, what's to complain about, you know? You kind of just accept it, this is life. If right from a child they went to school and the teachers couldn't communicate, they struggled at school. So what's the difference going to work?
So after I finished at Dalton's, I moved to Spode, and there was a few other deaf people there, and I used to help them just to communicate.
I only had one job. You know, it was such a good job. I had one job and I worked there for 35 years. It was really enjoyable.
So I worked 45 years lithography. I really liked that job.
30 years I worked there, and then it closed.
It's going, it's disappearing. All the major factories now have closed. There's still some good, smaller factories doing lovely work, but it's very small now compared to how it used to be.
Where practicable, old buildings may be adapted, but architects and builders are urged to make special provision for the disabled when designing places of employment, entertainment, sport, worship, and the very necessary public conveniences.
Went to the Deaf Club from the age of 13, and obviously missed the Deaf Club now.
So the older generation of today, they very much relied on the Deaf Centre, because technology then, nobody had mobile phones, we didn't have WhatsApp and FaceTime.
We communicate with mobiles now, so yeah, it is a lot different than it used to be.
But today's generation, they haven't had that upbringing. They go to mainstream schools, they have more support. We have interpreters exist, so they access the world very differently.
Friendly gatherings such as this build up a very necessary companionship. Concern for others takes the place of self, and in this way lasting friendships are born and cemented. The teamwork of all concerned and the cooperation and trust of the disabled themselves ensures the maximum success of the social rehabilitation program and opens wide the gateway to a fuller and happier life.
Today's generation, they need us when they need interpreters to be booked for, you know, medical appointments or job interviews, but they can just text us. They don't have to come to the building to see us. They can just send us a message and say, on this date, on this time, I got a job interview, can I have an interpreter? And we sort it. So it's just a different generation, and technology is what's really advanced it and really helped.
What of the future? This waste ground will become a specially adapted garden. Extensions to the centre are planned for people who will never be able to obtain full-time employment and who may be committed to a social security allowance for life. This welfare project will provide the additional accommodation for diversionary employment within the encouragement scale allowed.
We're all unique and they're no different, so their backgrounds are as diverse and unique as ours.
A very good example of what you can do if you have the will to give the disadvantaged a chance.